My name is Michael, and I welcome you to the webinar on MaaS. And our question today is, can mobility as a service contribute to sustainable mobility and how to establish it successfully? Before we start the webinar, I would like to introduce the tool we're using today to you. So at the moment, all of you, like all participants, are muted. But over the webinar, you'll have the chance to raise your hand using the button or ask questions. We'll collect all the questions and summarize them at the end of all presentations. And that will be also the moment where you have the chance to raise your hand if you have like an urgent or corresponding questions you would like to ask specifically to some topics. This webinar is organized by the CIVITAS Initiative, and the CIVITAS Initiative will have in September the CIVITAS Forum in Umeå. I hope I spoke that right. And we would like to welcome you all there and see you all. This webinar specifically is organized by Polis, which is a leading network or the leading network of transport authorities in Europe. And we are connecting transport authorities on various topics in various ways. And you'll find more information on our website. So let's start. This webinar is actually part of a series, which this webinar is the first webinar of. And we'll have 2 more webinars in September and October. The first one will be on accessibility, traffic bundling, and on-demand shuttles, and the second one will be on cooperation with private operators and open data in October. After this webinar, you'll get actually a reminder and like an after email, and you'll have the chance to subscribe to an email newsletter about these webinars. Today, we will have 4 presentations. The first presentation will be by Maria from the MaaS Lab of the University College in London. The second presentation will be by Susan, who heads the Polis Working Group on Transport Efficiency. The third presentation will be done by Vincent Neumeier, who's working at Vienna Linien and is there responsible for multimodal travel. And the fourth presentation on the MaaS readiness indicator will be by Stella, who is working at the city of Turku. All right, so we'll start with Maria. There we are.
Good morning. I am Maria Kamariani from MaaS Lab, University College London. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation is about the opportunities of MaaS for the urban transport system and the value to customers. Since I am the first presenter, I will start briefly with a small introduction about what MaaS is. In our daily mobility, if we travel without using a private car, we have to face a lot of pain points. There are different transport modes, different journey planners, and each one of these offer different information, and it is difficult if we are not aware about this to find this transport mode and relevant information. In addition, there are several ways to access and pay for these transport modes. Some of these transport operators accept smart cards, other cash, other have these traditional paper-based tickets. So there are several pain points for the commuters and the people who are traveling. The mobility as a service concept initiates a new player in the transport market, the MaaS provider or the MaaS operator. And the MaaS operator integrates the offerings from the supply side, from the mobility service providers, and offers all this to users via a single interface. Usually, a MaaS operator on this single interface should offer a multi-service journey planner, real-time information, booking, payment, ticketing, and an account for a user to control all their trips. In the supply side, when we say mobility service providers, we include the transport operators, the traditional transport modes, but we can also include mobility supportive services, and later on, especially in the era of autonomous vehicles, other services that could advance the experience of the users while traveling. So that's why we do not just call them transport operators, but we have a bigger box with the mobility service providers in the supply side. Mobility as a service could work both within an urban environment, but also from a city to city, the concept of roaming in transport. So mobility as a service is a user-centric, intelligent mobility management and distribution system in which an integrator brings together offerings of multiple mobility service providers and provides end users access to them through a digital interface, allowing them to seamlessly plan and pay for mobility. There are a lot of definitions about mobility as a service, and there is a confusion in the market. But services like just car sharing or just ride hailing, at least for us, are not considered as MaaS. Also, MaaS is not just monthly subscription packages, or not just an intermodal journey planner. The concept of MaaS covers several topics that have been extensively discussed in the transport sector during the last decades, such as the integration, interconnectivity, optimization of the transport services, smart and seamless mobility, and sustainability. And within the MaaS concept, there are several terms that we should start using in order to make clear to what we refer. So there are concepts, terms like the MaaS operator, the MaaS platform, the MaaS products, that could be the MaaS plans or pay as you go, and several other terms. So the concept of MaaS could bring several benefits to the transport system, and especially to the public transport system of the cities. Of course, the benefits and their impact are specific to each city, because each city has its own characteristics. And the results that I am going to present now comes from a survey that we conducted for London and Transport for London. So the concept of mobility as a service could affect positively several aspects of the transport system, and more specifically of the public transport system, and improve their efficiency. In terms of passenger demand, we have identified both for London but also for the other cities that we conduct MaaS market research. We have identified that the demand for public transport services will probably rise if MaaS is introduced. The extent that the demand would rise depends largely on the chosen MaaS product, and to the extent of switching away from public transport, of course. But overall, it is noticed that the percentage of the participants who stated that they would increase the use of public transport is higher than those who stated that they would decrease their public transport use. Mobility as a service could also affect the capacity of the transport modes. It could improve the network efficiency and optimize capacity and demand. And especially during peak hours, the excessive demand can be redirected to underutilized routes or other transport modes. The mobility as a service concept could improve the flow at the stations with this electronic ticketing or a single ticketing for all transport modes. The demand, the flows at the ticketing machines could be alleviated. And MaaS could also improve the interconnectivity, the connectivity of the transport modes, not only across the public transport modes, but across the public transport modes and the other transport modes available in the city. Mobility as a service could also affect the revenue of the public transport authorities, but also of the other transport operators that participate in this scheme. Results from market research in London, Birmingham, Budapest, Luxembourg and Manchester indicate that end users widely prefer MaaS products that definitely include public transport. So this is an opportunity for public transport authorities to increase their revenue. But of course, MaaS could reinforce the demand for the other transport modes, since now all the transport modes in the city are integrated, and especially the first and last mile connectivity could be improved. Then such a concept, by accessing all the transport modes through a single interface, could also offer very data of high quality, and this data could be used for travel planning and transport planning, and especially since this data could be about intermodal trips, then the transport authority of the city could have access to a very rich data set for planning ahead. The second part is the benefits of MaaS for end users, and here we will see some statistics about what end users believe about MaaS and MaaS products. Starting from the MaaS products, so far in our surveys, we see that public transport is the backbone of the mobility as a service products. This is an example from London, where we see that public transport is included in all the selected MaaS plans, and the same patterns are for the other cities that we conduct market research about MaaS. And then a key question to the policymakers, what will be the modal shifts about mobility as a service? Of course, we will have shifts towards all directions. Some people that use public transport modes, they will switch to other transport modes like taxi or on-demand services. And then we also have the car users, where again we have shifts towards public transport, but also towards active transport like bike, and then on-demand services like taxi. But when you sum up all the figures together, we understand that public transport is the one that gains the most demand. Regarding the attitudes towards MaaS, most of the participants, 51% of the participants in the market research in London, they stated that they would be willing to try new transport modes that they previously didn't use if MaaS plan included them. And this indicates that MaaS it could be used as a demand management tool in order to expose people to transport modes that are not that popular, and also it's a good opportunity for them to start using these transport modes. But the key question is who is the MaaS operator, because all these results and impact assessment depends also on what services does the MaaS operator offer. So there are several options about who is the MaaS operator and what products they could offer. In case of a public transport authority, we can achieve the inclusion of several transport modes in these MaaS products. When a transport operator is a private transport operator is the MaaS operator, we may face issues about competition. So there are some potentials that the products, MaaS products that they will be offered will be limited. In the case of a new MaaS company offering MaaS products, we see that we have the most potentials to offer innovative products that could shift the demand towards sustainable travel behavior. And then in the option where we have a journey planner company to offer MaaS products, again, we see that we can achieve a sustainable modal shift. To assess all this, and because each city has different characteristics, we have developed the MaaS Maturity Index, where we assess what will be the impact in each city, specifically based on 4 categories and around 30 criteria. So you can find more information about these statistics and this work on our website on maaslab.org. Thank you very much.
Okay, shall I start straight away?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So can everyone see my slide? So good morning from my side. So my name is Suzanne Hody. I work at Polis. So I'm a colleague of Mikel, who is moderating the webinar today. And what I'm going to do over the next 8 minutes or so is take you through some of the findings of some work that we have done within Polis with our own members, so city and regional authorities, in terms of what are the implications of mobility as a service for them. So before I actually go into the MaaS topic, I think it's good to bring a bit of context to this whole MaaS discussion. And the first thing that I think is important to remind ourselves is, well, what is the role of local government in transport? Well, as we can see, it's multifaceted. It's about making policy. I mean, we're all familiar with the sustainable transport policies of cities. It's about making rules and regulations where necessary. So, you know, city authorities, regional authorities have a role in terms of regulating access to our roads and to our streets, in terms of parking, in terms of regulating, for instance, taxis. They also procure transport services, especially public transport services, but also, for instance, bike sharing and car sharing in some cities. And they also conduct transport operations, so whether that's traffic management, whether that's real-time information services. But this role is changing due to advances in technology and changes in customer expectation. So for instance, today we see more and more information services, travel information services delivered through apps or satellite navigation systems. So there's a growing role for the private sector. But in many cases, this is enabled by the data that's made available by public authorities. And city authorities are also increasingly working in partnership with the private sector to deliver better outcomes for customers, so especially for those journeys that cannot be easily served by traditional public transport, and also to fill those gaps, those service gaps, but which also support the city's wider sustainable transport policy. And I think so there are some interesting initiatives coming from the US, where some of the transport authorities are starting to work with what they call the micro transit companies, so your ride hailing services and other types of new mobility services, working together with them to see where these new mobility services can well, the role that they can play in the city's transport service. A second important context is that, you know, multimodality, integrated systems and services, new mobility services are not new. So MaaS did not invent them. You know, cities have been striving for improved integration of transport systems and services, whether that's information services, payment services. They have been increasingly making their data available to enable smartphone apps with information. So this has been happening for a long time, but of course, cities are at different stages. Some are very advanced in terms of this integration, multimodality, whereas others are less advanced. So that begs the question, well, what's so different about mobility as a service, especially from a city perspective? Well, I think what we found was that, okay, what mobility as a service does is it brings the third party service provider into the picture. It's also this personalized mobility package. This is another novel element, and so we see many opportunities from this, bringing the third party into this picture, but we also see some risk. And the first risk is about disincentivizing a sustainable mobility. So we heard from Maria that based on the market research conducted, that there should be a positive impact in terms of public transport use, for instance. We certainly hope that that will become reality. But if we look to some, you know, some headlines coming from the US and some recent research from the US about the impact of ride-hailing services on public transport, I'm afraid that's not the picture we are getting. You can see from the picture or the screenshot from the Chicago Tribune that you know, they're claiming that Uber and Lyft are actually congesting cities. And some research just coming recently from the University of California about the impact of ride-hailing services shows that these services are eroding public transport. And not only are they eroding public transport, but they are generating new trips, so even more trips that perhaps would not have been conducted previously. A second risk that we see is higher costs for the user or for the transport provider, because at the end of the day, the MaaS operator has to make a living. So either the user will have to pay more for the services, or the transport provider will have to accept less for the rides that they are selling to the MaaS operator. And the final risk concerns the creation of, well, the potential creation of a disconnect between the user, the transport provider, and the transport authority, because we are bringing in an intermediate player between the user and the provider or the authority. It is a concern for many cities and also passenger transport authorities, because there has been a big effort in recent years to improve public transport, whether it's a rolling stock, information, infrastructure, but also to create a brand. I mean, we know that in many cities, people are familiar with the brand. So going forward, what do we think are the main considerations that for cities and regional authorities if they want to move forward with MaaS? Well, the first one is about defining what is the best role for them in the MaaS environment. Should they be a leader, an enabler, or an observer? Also, a key issue is about finding the right public-private sector balance. So what stays with the public sector and what goes to the private sector? Another important issue is improved or getting more information about the impact of MaaS on travel behaviour. We hope that it will be positive, but we simply do not know at this stage. Another issue is about the user-centric approach. I mean, to what extent it can deliver system benefits. I mean, I'm wondering whether the user-centric approach is really compatible with, you know, the wider societal goals and sustainable mobility policy goals that that cities and regions have. A fifth issue is about determining the best market environment for MaaS, bearing in mind that if we have many, many different apps on offer, it could become quite confusing for certain people. So for my mum, for instance, I'm not sure how she would find her way in this MaaS environment. And I think another point here is that, you know, the MaaS approach, so a smartphone app, whether it's third party or whether it's run by the public sector, it will not be the only way of accessing the transport systems. I think these MaaS apps will coexist with existing systems, existing payment schemes. So for instance, smart cards or other types of ways of paying for your transport service. Another issue is understanding the business model and who will pay. I think I mentioned that on the previous slide. And then finally, we need to explore what could be the potential long-term impact of MaaS on transport service procurement. Some of the Polis members have said that the way they will procure transport services, especially public transport in the services, in the future will be quite different to today. So for instance, whereas today a transport authority may tender specific tram lines or bus routes, in the future they may not do this. They may tender for a level of service in a given area and then leave it up to the market to propose different types of services, whether it's collective services or individual services. So the main messages coming from our paper are that, you know, of course, transport authorities support working with the private sector, especially to offer better services that cannot be easily accommodated by traditional public transport. But where there is already good integration of transport service, it's really not clear whether there would be a workable business case for third-party MaaS offers. And the diversity of Europe's cities and regions make it unlikely that a single MaaS model would be universally applicable. Whatever MaaS approach is adopted by city, there is a need for public sector oversight. And if you want to find out more about the findings of our work, then I invite you to visit the Polis website and to download our paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Let's go on and Vincent. Vincent, you're still muted.
Oh, hopefully perfect. Now you can hear me. Perfect. Hello from my side, and welcome to the seminar from Vienna. My name is Vincent Norma, and I'm working as a project manager at Wiener Linien, the public transport provider in the city of Vienna. So here we go. I would like to give you a quick glance into the city of Vienna and Wiener Linien and how we are approaching mobility as a service and how far we have gotten so far. So I will give you a quick insight how it evolves, because despite I would say that we are quite well developed in the field of meeting MaaS requirements, still in some way it happened to us. So it was not all strategically planned from the beginning. I would like to give you a quick insight into our daughter company, Upstream Mobility, and some of our products. And then I would finish my presentation with general thoughts on MaaS. As we heard already, especially from Susan, that those important questions are the ones which should be answered quite quickly in order to be prepared for the future in mobility's service delivery. So where are we all coming from? It's our strategic goals of our strategic transport or mobility development plan. In the city of Vienna, we would like to develop our model split towards eco-mobility modes. We would like to lower the split of the motorized individual traffic naturally, and we consider mobility as a service as one important tool set or one important field of activities we need to take care of in order to really achieve those goals, because we are certain about the fact that it's not all about infrastructure and it's not all about improving quality of services of the public transport, but it needs to, we as a city and as a public transport provider, we need to tackle more than just our core business. So, how did it develop? This slide gives you a quick overview about how we slowly approached digitalization of our core services of public transport within Vienna Linien. We've all started very classically with text tickets. So with old mobile phones, you could get your public transport ticket via a text message. And this slowly developed towards our first routing information application for smartphones. It was called Quando. It developed further. We developed a single ticket application where you could get all your tickets. And then there was a very big research project which was called SMILE. It first tried in Vienna and in Austria an integrated mobility platform. And with this buzzword, this research project tried to realize what was in theory already on the paper for quite a time. And what was very interesting with this research project was that it was really a common endeavor, both together Vienna Linien on the one side, so the biggest urban public transport provider, and the ÖBB, the Austrian railway company, together with research institutions, with IT operators, with software providers, and so on. They were all coming together and trying this integrated mobility platform in this one research project. Due to strategic reasons, after SMILE, especially ÖBB and Vienna Linie, we split our ways and we followed different paths, which finished finally for us, for Vienna Linien, in developing Wien Mobil, which is our current multimodal app, which is not only a journey planner, which is not only a way to buy your tickets, but it gives you as well some information about some additional mobility services all around you. It means it integrates car sharing, bike sharing, and so on. This is how it looks like today. Wien Mobil is on the market now. So the first phase started 2017 in springtime, and a couple of weeks back we had a new release which really improved Wien Mobil a lot, in my opinion, and which gives you the opportunity, first of all, to, of course, use public transport, but to use as well some other modes like car sharing, bike sharing, but as well some multimodal journey planners towards different depths of service. So some of the services you can just depict on the map. So you see there is a car sharing car by Drive Now, the BMW service, and some other services you can, for example, set a reservation, or you can find some detailed information about the car, for example, the fuel capacity or the whether it's reserved by other clients and so on. But still, Wien Mobil is quite far developed by now, but it's not perfect yet. So we have still some challenges, especially in terms of accessibility. We need to fulfill some more standards so that really there's full accessibility for handicapped people, for example. And there are as well still not all the functions integrated, which our clients are used to by our old product Quando. For the development of Wien Mobil, the application, we have founded as Vienna Linien and as the public utilities Vienna, we have founded a daughter company called Upstream Mobility. Vienna is the majority owner of this company, which is basically a software house or our internal IT provider, which set up and which services the mobility service platform, as you can see depicted here, where all the different modes connect to the mobility service platform. The platform provides and facilitates different functions, for example, routing and information and billing and tickets and so on. And this can be used, of course, on different kind of devices, mobile devices, or as well some classical desktop computers. And our ambition behind that is actually that with this one mobility platform organized by the public transport provider and indirectly by the public sector, we improve efficiency of the mobility network in Vienna on the long run, and we allow different mobility service providers, new mobility service providers who would like to enrich the market here in Vienna to connect and to find some very clear preconditions in order to operate here in Vienna their services. Besides the digital level, we have as well some other products in the pipeline in order to fulfill the buzzword mobility as a service with some real life, and this goes as well towards physical infrastructure. We are right now in the development of our first mobility points in the public space. The first one will start now in fall 2018 within a EU Horizon 2020 project. It will be built in the 11th district, which is more worker district, so not the classic car sharing and bike sharing friendly and affiliated area, let's call it that way. And this is our approach to really bundle new mobility service physically in public space, and to give it as well a good shape and a good organization for the clients. Because right at the moment for the clients, you have a lot of offers, you have a lot of services available, but the information and as well the spatial aggregation of those services is not perfectly developed. And for us as a public transport provider and for the city of Vienna, of course, it's quite important to keep the lead over infrastructure in the mobility as a service environment and ecosystem in the city, because we not consider, of course, data the one and only infrastructure element of the 21st century, but one important one. And this gives us as well the security and as well the certainty about our approach that infrastructure and data will play a crucial role in the upcoming years in mobility service deliveries. We support a very strongly a coordinated strategy in order to build up a coordinated MaaS framework, which gives certainty to new providers, new mobility providers in the city, but as well to us, of course, as a public transport provider, which should be as well operable in 30, 40, 50 and more years. What is very interesting is that mobility as a service, the concept and everything what is pondering around, it asks the questions about the core responsibility of the public sector. So every city and every community needs to ask itself, how far should our responsibility go, and how far should we leave the mobility market to private businesses. And I would like to finish with the one aspect which I would like to see fulfilled by mobility as a service, that it should be used as a leverage in order to overcome administrative borders, for example, between cities and regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. And let's have the last presentations by Stella.
Okay. Is everything set and you can see it?
Yes.
Great. Still mixing. Yeah. Good webinar from my side also. My name is Stella Aaltonen. I'm working for the city of Turku in Turku, Finland, and I'm also a site manager for CIVITAS Eccentric project, which I'm talking about as a next. We, in the CIVITAS Accentric project, we have 5 cities, meaning Stockholm, Munich, Madrid, and Bulgaria, Rusa, and Turku. We were struggling with what is mobility as a service, and we have one dedicated work package where we decided that we will look into a wider perspective. What can a local authority do to get MaaS ongoing in the city? So how do we then figure out the MaaS? MaaS is as very well defined by the previous speakers, something that we see as a water or as a hair salon style. So we are aiming towards it being very easy, transferable, flowing, and inexpensive in all of its operations. But MaaS is much more than just the platforms that have been talked about, and therefore we wrote these MaaS readiness level indicators for local authorities, which can be used as a cross-sectoral view for the MaaS, as a checklist, or as a creating a common understanding. So this actually tool can be used for various purposes, and it can show the different various levels of readiness where the city is at the moment, or the local authority, and give some hints on where to go further on MaaS issues in the city. So it can be used for very many purposes. We have defined 8 different areas where the city can develop, and it all starts from analyzing the user needs. So basically it has a pre-assumption that the users are analyzed to the full extent, so that the city has an understanding of what are the needs of the customers in the center, and also all of the potential data is gathered to back up the levels that are then being analyzed by the city. So we actually have identified so far 5 different levels on each of these layers, but actually the levels can vary a bit between whether they're number 4 or 5, so they can differ a bit. But also there is a level of 0, and you can see in the end when I'm showcasing the different web figures of each of our cities that it can be also used to identify where we haven't really started working yet. So as a preconditions, you would have the user needs analyzed and as data to brought together. So I go through these different levels one by one to get the full understanding what do we mean by the MaaS. So first we go for the strategic readiness. So this is one of the areas that is very much focused in the local authorities side. So what we are looking in the MaaS issues is we've identified already that there are several steps where you can see where the city is currently working, or is it actually working at all on the MaaS. So you can see that there are in some cases there are no measures explicitly focusing on mobility as a service, or they are or local authorities involved in measures supporting the mobility as a service, or it has already a clear plan or strategy or policy that supports MaaS in the local context, or it has actually generated funding, ongoing or project-based, or it actually has a person that is in charge of bringing the different aspects of mobility as a service into focus. And another step under the strategic readiness is the very crucial fact that is the parking policies, that the local authority has a control and can influence a lot. So basically it has steps where there's no parking policies that are explicitly taking care of the mobility as a service for different operator size. There is a parking policy that is necessarily not supporting shared use of vehicles or transport on demand issues. And on a third level, there's a readiness to change the parking policies on critical areas of the local authority, or to reduce the private parking. Normally this happens in new residential areas, for example, that it starts to spread. And the number 4, there's a new business model supporting adapting parking standards on residential areas. And then there's a really on the next level, there's a really an understanding of how the car sharing and car shares are taken into account. So then we move on from the strategic readiness, where the local authority can identify themselves, into internal use, which is in many cases ignored, as the local authority themselves can be a very heavy user and can actually have a huge impact on actually speeding up the mobility as a service in the local authorities. So in the internal use, we are talking about traveling guidelines for the staff and the politicians. In many cases, the politicians are ignored in the staff guide and the traveling guidelines, but in here we think this is a very important fact. And as you can see, it involves the prioritizing of sustainable mobility as a whole, and then it goes step by step towards the finance where there's actually a decline on the private car usage by the on the travel behaviors of the staff and the politicians. So it actually increases the likelihood of having operators that are valid and working in the city. And as a part of second part of the internal use, there's a use of shared mobility within the local administration. And this means that the local administration actually would be encouraging the different kind of uses. In the first level, there's a shared mobility services are not used in the local authority really, or they are only used by a limited number of employees. On the third level, they are used by the majority of the staff and politicians. And on the fourth level, the shared mobility services are offered by several service providers. So there are different variety of options. And actually in the fifth level, they would be available off the working hours also, so evenings and weekends for a large number of users. Then from the internal use, a third area is a shared understanding. So this goes to the visibility and more towards what Vienna was pointing out in the previous presentation. So basically, how can the customers identify and find in the visuals on the streets and on the market, how can they find the different modes that are available? So at the first level, the customers can find multimodal, minimum 2 transport modes, and traveler information. Here's the very basic information level. On the second level, you would have several channels from which the customers can find multimodal traveler information. And on the third, they can find the visuals, whether campaigns or options or mobility services while they are traveling in the city. On the fourth level, they can change their means of transport easily from these nodes where there are several operators or transport modes available. And actually on the fifth level, we have so far identified actually the most that are called the MaaS operators, their usage or their profitability has increased within the past years. As an integration platform, which is mostly when we are talking about the mobility as a service, this is the second topic that comes to everyone's mouth, and it has been also pointed out in the earlier presentations. Here we start from the fact that the data of the Public Transportation Authority has not been opened. On the second, it is open or standardized so that the third parties can use it and create new apps and services. On the third level, the third parties use open data and provide mobile applications, which was very well pointed out earlier. And then on the fourth level, the local authorities promote and facilitate cooperation between different providers and any means. And then actually, there's a lot of operations on already selling their services through the apps on the fifth level. Together, they are selling public transportation and MaaS operators and other providers on the same platform. Then we go to the shared use, which is another area of focus, and public transportation was already touched upon very well in the earlier presentations. On the first level in here, we have identified that the customers can buy local public transportation tickets only via public transportation's own provided channels. On the second level, they can buy it through several channels offered by third parties. On the third level, public transportation authorities is actively connecting with other MaaS operators or transport providers in the area and have plans to offer package deals to customers. And on the fourth level, the public transportation authority has multimodal package deals with other MaaS operators to customers. And actually on the fifth level would be when you are already blending the service levels with other operators such as hotels, grocery stores. So actually you would go all the way and have a combo packages with different service providers. So that would be the fifth level at the moment. But as I pointed out earlier, there might be coming a sixth and seventh level. So this is how far we have gone so far on analyzing and identifying the different opportunities. As part of the shared use is also how the shared economy is actually being enforced and encouraged in the local authorities area. So basically availability and market penetration of combined travel options. So in many cases in local authorities, there's no offers really actually provided by other than the local authorities. So on the first level, there are no companies offering shared vehicles yet on the boundaries of the local authority. On the second, there are pilots on campaigns or incentives taking place regarding shared mobility options. On the third level, there are different kinds of shared mobility opportunities offered by companies available for citizens, whether they are bike sharing, car shares, scooters, whatever. Then on the fourth level, there are more than 5 different kinds of MaaS operators providing combined mobility offers, because at the currently, for example, the Finnish markets, there are a lot of MaaS operators coming up. And then in the fifth, there are again these package deals that have been mentioned before. So they are not limiting to only mobility things, but they are packaging different kind of services together. So based on these different levels, you could then identify your own spider web, and this is the spider web at the currently of the city of Turku. So where we are with the different operations, so you can see that we are steady number 2, and then in some areas we have been developing more and focused more on the recent years. And just to showcase also the eccentric couple of other partners, here are the Madrid and Stockholm spider webs. You can see they have been progressing a bit differently and starting on the different areas of the spider web, but every one of us have identified already the next levels and what are the steps needed. And actually this kind of spider web has been used by several cities already, because it actually eases up the discussions from the solely IT place to the more diverse variety of options what the city can influence. And in here, there's the Munich and the city of Ruses spider web. So you can see that there are different approaches where you can tackle the issues in all together. And so far, the feedback when this kind of a MaaS readiness level indicators was launched in last September has been really enthusiastic, and several cities have been starting to do their own spider webs, because you can easily actually sketch it and decide where you are at the moment. Yeah, this was a brief introduction, and you can find the MaaS readiness level indicator on the CIVITAS website, for example.
Thank you so much, Stella, and thanks everybody else. Maybe all the presenters could come up by camera again, so we can start the Q&A. So far we have only received one question, but now is everybody's chance to raise your hand, and you'll have the chance to ask your questions right away. I'll basically unmute you and you'll have a chance. And while you think about a question, maybe we could look at a first question, which came from Helen Carlson from Stockholm. And she asked Maria, which full MaaS services are in operation in London and how long?
Hi, Helen. We do not have any MaaS services that are operational in London yet. The results that I presented for London and also for the other cities are from the market research we do for the cities before they initiate mobility as a service. And it is some preliminary results in order to understand what direction could MaaS services take, and what a potential effect may be. So these results are is a seed for planning ahead for the MaaS initiation.
Thank you, Maria. And I have a hand from Evelyn.
Yes, hi, I'm Evelyn from the European Passengers Federation, and actually I have a question for Vincent of Vienna Linien. As we all know, mobility doesn't stop at the city borders. I really like your initiative of how you have formed the platform, and you have a good relation with the private sector. But I was wondering, is there a similar platform for a bigger region or for Austria as a whole? And how can your platform be merged? Because I think for the information to the customers would be better, even better if it's on a regional or national level. Hello, did you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can.
Okay.
Oh, okay, now it works. Thank you for your question. That's a good point. In Austria, there is nothing comparable on the regional level and especially on the cross-border level in terms of integration of different modes. We have different input factors, especially concerning routing and journey planning in Austria. So the background data for the routing, for example, comes from the national level. So here we use all the same platform, which is coordinated by the federal level. But still, we know about this huge effect, which a widening of our platform into the region, especially into the metropolitan region of Vienna, could have. But this is really an organizational issue that we are not as quick as we would like to proceed in this. And this will be a big construction side, I think, from our side. But this is where we are heading for.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. We have a question. Sorry. We have a question by Dominic, and he asked, what's the biggest challenge for integrated mobility? And is the challenge because of regulations or cooperating third-party providers? Good question who to ask. Maybe Susan, would you like to answer that question?
So the main challenge for integration. Well, I'd say 15 years ago, there was a big technical challenge. I remember when some of our members started working on multimodal information. They had to bring the data sets from all the different transport providers together and standardize that. So I remember that was a big challenge. I think we've sort of worked through that. The difference with MaaS is that it's bringing in these integration. In most cities, we have reasonable integration of your more traditional public transport modes. But I think where cities have been weaker, passenger transport authorities, is in terms of extending these platforms to the individual transport modes. And that's why I think MaaS has gained some momentum, because it's really reaching out to your taxis, your car sharing clubs, your ride hailing services. So those sorts of services that are run by the private sector, essentially. So I think there's mindset is probably a bit of an issue. On the technical side, I believe there's a lot of work that's been done already. Cultural factors, I think, are important. But also, in my view, it's about, well, what will the impact be purely from a public authority perspective? Is what will the impact be? I mean, is it really going to support our sustainable mobility goals? And I think it's for this reason that some public authorities like Vienna, but also lots of other cities in Europe are taking a public sector approach to MaaS. So doing MaaS themselves rather than just opening everything up and leaving it to the market to deal with.
Helen had a direct question to that. You need to unmute yourself to be able to speak. Oh, that doesn't work for the moment. Maybe we'll try later. So meanwhile, we have a question from Antal, and he's asking, what are the main differences between the MaaS maturity index and the MaaS readiness indicators? He asked Stella and Maria. Maybe Maria, you could start answering the question.
In the mass maturity index, we include and assess all the aspects that are needed in order to initiate mobility as a service. So we take into account the transport modes that are in the city, what data they have, the transport infrastructure, the ICT infrastructure, the policies, the frameworks that are in place, and then of course the modal preferences of the citizens to understand what is the mentality of the citizens towards using other transport modes instead car. I think that there is a different approach in these two indexes. Stella, I think your index looks more into the transport modes and policies, right?
More into it's on a lighter level. It's more or less on the discussion level, which is the direction that you are supposed to go, or are you actually going? And it doesn't indicate so much. It doesn't go so in depth with the details as maturity index actually does. It raises the issues where should the focus actually be, because what happens currently in a lot of the local authorities, they are a bit confused because we have a lot of companies coming and saying we have a ready-made solution for you, by hours. So actually it points out what are the other areas where the city could actually work in order to speed up and bring more operators or bring more focus, and what would be their next steps in that direction if they would like to approach it. So it's an in a way easier way to start and bring, for example, politicians to discuss also these topics and this sort of a speed up.
All right, thank you. Helen, you're online now, aren't you? Unmute.
Yes, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have some questions about Wienermobil, and that's, for first, I understood it was like in operation for 1 year, something like that. So how much of the sales or the trips or something, how much of the total volume of the sales does it now take? And did you see that you actually were able to somehow reach car users and change somehow behavior? Was that possible to see in some way?
Unfortunately, Winston needed to leave on time. That's why he's not here anymore. But I note down your questions, and then we'll try to answer that later. All right. What else do we have? Yeah, I think like we have 5 more minutes and then we finish. Emeka from Barcelona is asking, how do higher private platforms like car sharing or DRT service are integrating in MaaS public transport and MaaS platforms? I think that's a theoretical question, like how ideally could you integrate car sharing or DRT services in these platforms? Is there any volunteers to answer that question?
If you have the data, if these transport operators have the data and the APIs for routing, booking, and accessing the mode, then it isn't difficult to integrate this. We have a Horizon 2020 project where we have 3 demonstration cities, actually areas. It is Budapest, Luxembourg, where we also test cross-border products and solutions with Germany, and Manchester. And in both in Budapest and Manchester, we have car sharing companies that participate in the demonstrations. And because these companies usually operate via a mobile app, they already have the required data in the right formats. So it is very easy to integrate these products in the platform. The technical aspect of mobility as a service It is like a piece of cake compared to the business side and the regulatory side. The business side is the commercial agreements that should be signed between the MaaS operator and the transport operators, and this takes quite a lot of time in order to agree all the points in these agreements. And we are aware of some MaaS demonstrations that have delayed almost a year due to these commercial agreements. And then it is about the policy frameworks, and the most hot question is about what happens with the data, who owns the data, how the data is protected, and these are the most challenging parts of this concept, and not that much the technology side.
Any additions to that? All right. Jesus, would you like to answer your question yourself? Right, I think I'll just read it out. So Jesus asked the question, do you believe that sustainable mobility in cities is the interrelationship between different transport operators is the future? Or do you think that electric mobility is the future? Susan, you're smiling.
What is the first part of the question? The second is about electric mobility, and the second, if
do
the
you
first?
Believe that sustainable mobilities in cities is the interrelationship between different transport operators?
Well, I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, electricity, that's just how you actually get your motorized vehicles to move, and that's it at the end of the day. I mean, they're two different issues in my view. I mean, we need different mobility providers to work together to bring about more integrated services, and maybe some of them will be powered by electricity and maybe they won't.
Sustainability is a very wide topic, and in order to be achieved, several actions, initiatives, or solutions should come in. So it's both, and even more.
Susan, there's another question directly for you, which is about the use of the user-centric approach and the benefits of the system. Yeah, actually it finishes there, sorry. Evelyn, would you like to summarize your question again?
Yeah, thanks. Suzanne, you mentioned during your presentation that you are not sure about the benefits of the user-centric approach to the system. I must say, I even though I work for a consumer organization, I do agree. I think there are the individual user preferences are not always in line with the preferences or the benefits for the community. And I was wondering if Polis has any advice for cities on this one, how they can find the right balance between both the individual and the community benefits. Regarding the MaaS, but also regarding other things like automated vehicles, electric vehicles, etc.
Do we have any guidelines, recommendations at the moment? No, but it's a very hot topic at the moment within Polis. In fact, it's one of our focal points of discussion this year and in the future is about what is. It's more about the governance and regulatory and policy framework. To what extent the framework we have today is fit for purpose, given the emergence of these disruptive mobility services that might be good for sustainable mobility, but which may not. And so we're just sort of getting to grips with this at the moment. So no, we don't have any concrete that we can share with you today, but hopefully over the next 12 to 18 months, we might have some interesting findings and recommendations.
Oh, that would really be nice. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you, Evelyn. Dominic asked a question about if cities are opening up their data and if they have if they plan any regulation to improve the access to open data. Stella, you were touching about the topic a bit on your indicators. Do you have any further information if that is becoming more common?
This varies a lot from country to country, and in some countries like in Finland there's a lot of work done on the opening of the data and then also enabling that the third parties can use it, and also we have by law also that the operators need to open their selling tickets APIs and these sort of things, so you can actually speed it up a lot. I see this as one of the biggest issues, is that how do you handle the data, as pointed out earlier, that actually that is the hot topic, and this is really one of the things that it comes into focus, and who has the customership in the end of the user when the user decides on something. So from the city's perspective, all the data that can assist and speed up is actually, in many cities we are working on opening it on the standardized way, and this is something that on the national level can be speeded up a lot by the law also.
Can I just add something to that as well? I'm not as much a MaaS expert as Stella and Maria are, but what I see as critical in terms of opening data is opening the ticketing data, so ticketing APIs, because open data is for transport service data, real-time data. This is happening already at different paces across Europe, that's for sure. But I remember when we in Polis started on open transport data 6 or 7 years ago, and a lot of our members told us, yeah, it's happening, we're building the infrastructure, the portal to make this data available, but the critical data is the ticketing APIs, and it's not a technical issue, it's a very sensitive and it's a very strategic issue, I think, for many cities.
Thank you both. And we have one last question that kind of fits to that. And that is, how do private mobility providers and public transport split up their business models in MaaS frameworks? What are normal contracts between those parties? Maria, maybe you have an answer to that.
Sorry, you were interrupted. So the question is, if what is the business models for?
For MaaS, like in between the public transport operators and the private mobility providers, and what are the contracts on MaaS? Like, how is it set up?
So these are confidential information. From the research projects we have, because it is a safe environment where you can experiment, we see that where in the cities where we have a MaaS company or a public transport authority to act as the MaaS operator, then it is easier to sign the required contracts. But in the case where you have a private transport operator as the MaaS operator, then the contracts, there is competition and it is difficult to sign contracts between two mobility providers. I know that I haven't answered your question completely, but most of this information are still, the answers are still unclear and confidential.
Maybe I can light up on a bit. In many cases, it's from the public transport authority side, is that there's demands for discounts, and then it goes actually for the question about how much do we subsidize, because public transportation is subsidized, and how do the politicians and decide on where the subsidies should go and should not go. So it goes into this discussion, which is actually a very strategic discussion and very vital actually. but then in the general, you could say that it's mainly a percentage based. In several of those that we've seen, it's a percentages, and then of course it's a question of whose percentage and to what kind of APIs and what kind of channels.
Just on this to add, there is the perception in the market that MaaS is a service that offers discounts. This is not the case, and from the current situation, it is very difficult for a transport operator to offer a discount to a MaaS service. So it is more about the integration, the convenience, and not a discount service.
All right, so we are almost 15 minutes longer than we should have been. I would like to thank all of you, especially for presenting, but also for listening. And we hope to see you for the next webinars in September and October. Have a nice summer. Thanks.
Bye. Have a nice summer.
Bye.
Bye.